Karan Bhasin, economist joining us from New York, get a perspective from him as well. Karan, good morning from India. We wanted to get your perspective on what to expect this time around from the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. We were also discussing how India is poised currently in the global landscape, given the kind of growth figures that have also been released in the economic survey yesterday. You know, how confident are you that India will manage to shake off some of the concerning factors globally and continue on its bounce back post-pandemic?
Hi, good morning to you and of course to all your viewers. I think the way I'm looking at this budget is that it is going to be pretty much a continuation of what we have seen thus far. And a lot of what we have seen already happens to be fiscal prudence. Even in light of pandemic, we didn't see that the government went out and spent, and it was really conservative and had a very iterative approach towards fiscal spending. Heavily linked, to capex and building assets, and I think that was one key differentiating factor why India did not experience the kind of high inflation that we see in many parts of advanced and emerging market economies. So I think they're going to stick to what has already worked, which is to be fiscally prudent. At the same time, I think that what the economic survey does is that it sets a nice background of sorts that why we may not need to fiscally tighten as much, or why we may choose not to fiscally tighten as much as what was initially feared. And the reason is that, as you rightly mentioned, this is a year where we would see growth not being as robust as it has been in the past. Several parts of the world are still witnessing a cycle of monetary tightening. We have no idea when interest rate hikes are going to end in many parts of the world.
Karan,
and we are starting to see the consequences of those rate hikes in housing prices and housing markets across the world.
Karan, let me interrupt you here, Karan, because you've mentioned 2-3 points that I want to take up. The first point, in terms of fiscal consolidation, the impulse of the Modi government right from 2014 onwards has been to be fiscally conservative. There are no major spends that have happened except during the COVID time, and one of the big programs there was even rolled back when it comes to the free food program. Why do you therefore say that or hint towards the fact that it may not choose to be as conservative? Are there concerns weighing on the policy makers with regard to growth in an uncertain global environment, Karan?
I would naturally assume, and I said that it may not be as conservative as we would have feared initially. So again, it's relative to what we thought they might do. I think they might not do it, given that their own economic survey is now talking about a growth which is much lower than the potential growth that many of us have calculated over the years. But you're right that the government, by its very nature, is fiscally conservative. And that's a sign of a worry, or rather a concern, that if we do over tighten in the given financial year, it will coincide with a very sharp monetary tightening. One of the things that I've been mentioning over the last couple of months is that India's real policy rates, not the nominal rates that the RBI fixes, but the real policy rates, forward rates, which is basically rates in the future, are back to being positive and are back to being close to +1. So we have already had a very sharp monetary tightening from real negative rates to a real positive rates.
Karan, I had one more question for you, and this is to do with the conservatism that we have seen in budget projections, and there has been significant amount of commentary about this, that the finance ministry has perhaps over the last 2 years, if not more, consistently kept certain projections, including on revenue, far below actuals. What could explain this strategy? Was it the fact that policymakers were concerned with the uncertainty that we have seen in the last 2.5 years, or is it part of a separate belief system that pervades North Block?
Well, perhaps it's the thought that you under-promise and over-deliver, maybe, or maybe it could also be overcorrection, because for a very long time we had finance ministers make projections that were unrealistic. Some of them even carried on to, the initial two budgets that were presented in this term of this government. And then eventually they perhaps realize that it does not add to a sense of fiscal credibility. But when you under-promise and over-deliver, then your fiscal numbers become a lot more credible. In fact, since we're talking about fiscal, a lot of the fiscal cleanup also incidentally happened only after the pandemic, when the government decided to bring in the off-budget balance sheet borrowings onto its balance sheet. So I think a lot of the fiscal mess has been cleaned up, so to say, and I think this broader trend of being conservative with respect to fiscal numbers is perhaps a part of that. It could also be, as you mentioned, because of the uncertainty that has been weighing down. But as far as last year is concerned, I don't think that there was any uncertainty that our tax numbers are going to surprise on the upside. I think many analysts were predicting that, were forecasting it, and I think largely their forecasts have come true.
Karan, of course, the government's also going to look at some of its schemes, social spending. They're going to talk a lot about public health infrastructure and so on and so forth, rural job schemes to drive growth at both ends of the economy. According to you, where do you see the requirement for the maximum outlay? What do you think is going to be the best possible scenario? Because they can't afford to go too populist, but at the same time, they're fairly committed to their stance in terms of ensuring that there's job security and a push when it comes to the rural segment as well.
Right. So, if you look at fiscal policy from a macro stability standpoint, they don't have much space to boost or pump prime consumption in areas which tend to be inflationary. So, for instance, they can't go out and increase MSPs beyond a point, which again is a constraining factor for them. So, my sense is that if there has to be a fiscal push, it should be driven towards capex as it has been in the past. They should focus on finishing some of the big ticket projects that they have already announced, ensuring timely payments are done, and ensuring that new projects, whichever can be delivered, whichever can be sanctioned, they must be sanctioned and they must be accelerated. The sheer capacity with which India is building infrastructure has amazed many people across the world. But again, there are delays, there are lags there. So I think rather than spending on new programs, spending on new schemes, I think it is a better utilization of fiscal funds if they're done in areas where we already have initiated projects and we just need to go the extra mile and finish them off, because that has a positive multiplier that will be realized in the present fiscal itself, which is useful when we're talking about a global slowdown and our export growth might not be as robust as it has been in the last couple of quarters.